In the spring of 1984, a yellow school bus carrying 10 high school seniors disappeared along Fog Harbor Road in coastal Maine. No crash, no witnesses, no trace. Locals blamed the fog. Police blamed the driver. But 40 years later, a piece of the bus was found buried beneath an abandoned barn, 40 miles inland. If you're drawn to unsolved disappearances, long-buried secrets, and stories where the past refuses to stay buried, subscribe. August 12th, 2024. Location: Barrow Hollow, Maine. A construction crew demolishing a crumbling barn stumbles upon a corroded metal roof buried beneath the dirt. A rusted school bus number is barely visible. As police arrive, they uncover bones, clothing fragments, and a cracked class ring marked FHHS 84. Detective Emery Thorne, nearing retirement, is called to reopen the decades-old case that has haunted the town of Fog Harbor. The fog came early that morning, thicker than usual, heavier somehow. It clung to the streets of Fog Harbor like a slow-moving tide, wrapping the coastal town in silence. The waves beyond the bluffs were muffled. Streetlights glowed like dying embers. Everything felt suspended in time. In the high school parking lot, bus number 78 idled quietly, its engine humming, headlights barely cutting through the mist. Gil Mason sat at the wheel, sipping coffee from a dented thermos. The interior of the bus was already warm, defrosters on low, windows sweating. He checked the clock above the dash, 6:01 a.m. He was early, as always. 23 years without a missed route. Never had an accident, never raised his voice. Gil was the kind of man who remembered birthdays, repaired loose seatbelts on his own time, and kept butterscotch candies in his shirt pocket for nervous kids. He didn't say much, but when he did, you listened. Today's trip was different, special. A select group of 10 students, all seniors, all high achievers. They were headed to the college fair in Portland, an overnight trip that was supposed to open doors, shape futures. Principal Bowman had called it a symbolic send-off. The kids called it a get-out-of-class free pass. Gil just called it a job. They began arriving in 2s and 3s, swallowed and revealed by the fog like ghosts materializing. Jessica Mayhew was first, her ponytail swinging, her breath fogging in front of her. She climbed aboard without speaking, as she always did, nodding politely to Gil. Sam Delaney came next, tall, lean, physics team captain. He gave Gil a thumbs up, slid into the seat next to Jessica, and passed her a granola bar. Brandon Vale followed, headphones on, mouthing lyrics, basketball bag slung over one shoulder. Carla Bridge trailed him, laughing at something he'd said, her denim jacket 2 sizes too big and covered in buttons. Manny Ortiz was next, carrying 2 energy drinks and a deck of playing cards. Then Holly Nguyen, Derek Qualls, Tina O'Malley, Rachel Penn. Last aboard was Eddie Caldwell, the new kid. He'd only been at Fog Harbor High for a few months, transferred mid-year. Nobody knew much about him. Quiet, watchful, always lingering at the edge of group photos, if he appeared at all. He didn't look up as he climbed the steps, just found a window seat in the back and stared out into the fog. At 6:21 a.m., Gil closed the doors with a hiss of hydraulics. The bus jolted forward, wheels crunching over gravel as it pulled out of the lot and turned onto the coast road. The town disappeared behind them, swallowed by mist. The ride was quiet. The kids were half awake, dozing or listening to music. A few whispered. Carla giggled. Brandon drew shapes on the fogged glass. Gil kept his eyes on the road, what he could see of it. Fog Harbor Road curved along the cliffs in lazy, dangerous S-shapes. Locals called it the turn, or just don't blink. On clear days, you could see the sea glittering far below, the rocky outcrops stained black with salt. But today, there was only gray, the kind of gray that swallowed sound, a wet, ghostly veil. The bus reached mile marker 17 at exactly 7:22 a.m. A fisherman, casting lines off the cliffs that morning, later told police he saw the yellow shape of bus number 78 glide past, slowly, carefully. Then it vanished into the wall of fog and didn't come out the other side. No one ever saw it again. By 8:45 a.m., when Ms. Darla Kane, the trip's designated chaperone, arrived at the college fair in Portland, there was no sign of the students. No bus, no call, no explanation. The front desk waited, called, checked again. At 9:12 a.m., she phoned the school. At 9:16, the principal called the sheriff. By 10:30, the entire Maine State Police fleet was combing the coast with helicopters, patrol cars, sonar teams, and volunteer divers. They checked every mile of Fog Harbor Road, every ditch, every stretch of beach. They flew drones over the cliffs. They dragged the tide pools. No skid marks, no broken guardrails, no oil slick on the sea, no glass, no wreckage, just a yellow bus and 10 teenagers who had disappeared like breath in a cold room. The community unraveled in days. Some blamed Gil, though no one truly believed he would hurt a soul. Others whispered about sinkholes, secret tunnels, cult activity. One old man swore the fog on mile 17 wasn't natural, said it had a temperature, a shape. People wanted answers, and when none came, they built myths. But some things weren't myth. 4 days after the disappearance, the Coast Guard found a single shoe in the reeds near Widow's Cove. It was waterlogged and torn. It belonged to Rachel Penn. It didn't help. With no bus, no crash, no bodies, and no proof of foul play, the case was quietly marked as an open disappearance. A euphemism, a shrug in writing. Fog Harbor grieved, then tried to forget. They held a candlelight vigil on the cliffs. 10 wooden crosses were placed in the soil above the sea. Gil Mason's was smaller. Some argued it shouldn't be there at all. Others insisted it should be the tallest. It stayed small. And then his wife moved away in silence. The following year, the school carved the students' names into a granite slab set into the east wall of the gym. 10 names, 10 fates. The inscription read, "The Fog Harbor 10, may you never be forgotten." But by the 3rd year, no one spoke of them out loud. By the 5th, teachers avoided the subject. By the 10th, a new generation of students walked past the plaque without looking. Fog Harbor turned its face forward, kept its head down, lived its quiet, fog-choked life. Until 40 years later, when a demolition crew pulled up the floorboards of a rotting barn in Barrow Hollow, 40 miles inland, and found a corroded sheet of yellow metal hidden beneath layers of dirt and concrete. Faint black numbers stamped across it. District 23, bus number 78. Beside it, buried in a sealed container, was a water-damaged varsity jacket, the fabric stiff with age. The name on the label stitched in fading thread, Brandon Vale. It didn't make sense. The coast was miles away. The barn had never been part of the original search, but the jacket was real. The metal was real. And for Detective Emery Thorne, who'd been 26 when he took his first statement on the case, it meant only one thing. The road hadn't ended in the sea. The bus had never crashed. Someone had hidden it. And now, 40 years later, the fog was beginning to lift. Detective Emery Thorne stood beneath the gray sky, the granite memorial wall behind him cold and damp with sea air. The fog rolled in the way it always had in Fog Harbor. Quiet, endless, inevitable. It threaded through the empty lot of the old high school, where weeds now pushed through cracked pavement and the basketball hoops hung crooked like forgotten skeletons. His breath misted in front of him as he ran his fingers across the 10 carved names, one after the other, each letter smoothed by years of coastal wind and rain. Jessica, Sam, Carla, Brandon, Rachel. He remembered their faces, not from photos, but from the rawness of the search. The panic, the unanswered questions. He remembered the day the trail went cold, the fourth day, the way the air changed when they all stopped believing the bus was coming back. Now, 40 years later, the roof of that same bus had surfaced beneath a rotted barn on the other side of the county. He lit a cigarette with trembling hands, the habit resurrected from a time he'd long buried. The tobacco tasted like old guilt. The news had already made it to the local station. Headlines were crawling across the screen when he'd walked into the station that morning. Breakthrough in 1984. School bus mystery, body remains unconfirmed. But Emery had seen enough in the dirt to know the past wasn't staying buried. He had been the youngest officer on the original case. Fresh badge, clean shoes. Naive enough to believe that a kid couldn't just vanish. Back then, he believed truth came with time. But time had passed. Truth hadn't. Until now. Inside the precinct, Officer Mila Gordon waited by her desk, tapping her pen against a cup of cold coffee. She was smart, skeptical, younger than Emery had been when this all started. She'd transferred in from Augusta last year, and he liked her because she didn't talk unless there was something worth saying. "You see the jacket?" she asked. "I saw the stitching," Emery replied. "It's Brandon's." Mila nodded, pulling up a digital scan of the item. "DNA's a mess, but the label's intact. Blue and gray varsity, Fog Harbor patch, name tag still attached. We found it 2 feet underground, wrapped in plastic. Someone meant to preserve it. And the roof? Deliberately buried. Piece of the ceiling cut clean, jagged, but not natural. This wasn't an accident, Thorne. It was covered on purpose, like someone didn't just want the bus to disappear. They wanted it to be sealed." Emery stared at the image on the monitor. The color had drained from the metal, but the numbers remained. District 23, bus number 78. It hadn't sunk. It hadn't fallen. It had been planted. "What else did you find?" Mila hesitated, then opened another file. This. It was an old photograph, black and white, from a 1992 zoning inspection. The barn before it collapsed. In the background, a man stood behind the fencing. Too far to make out clearly, but his posture was wrong. Too still, too aware of the camera. His coat was long, his head tilted downward. Just enough shadow to make his face unreadable. "Who is he?" "No ID, not on file." "Inspector filed a trespassing note in the report. Said the guy refused to answer questions. No follow-up." It was the 90s. Small town. They let it go. "Can you clean it up?" Mila gave him a look. "It's not Blade Runner, Thorne. I can sharpen contrast. I can't give him a driver's license." Emery leaned forward anyway, studying the image. There was something in the way the man stood, like he was listening, waiting. Behind him, nearly out of frame, something metallic peeked through the weeds. Yellow, curved. The bus had already been buried. "I want every record on that property owner," he said, "and I want to know who was in that photo." The school itself hadn't changed much. Now abandoned and boarded up, the structure still stood like a monument to something unfinished. Emery pushed open the rusted gym doors and stepped into the hollow space. The basketball court smelled of mold and dust. Paint peeled from the walls in long, tired strips. But the memorial was still there. 10 names. The plaque installed just after the search ended, a stone apology carved into the wall. He studied it again. The dates, the names, the neatness of it. Something felt off. At the bottom corner, he noticed a scratch. Fresh, narrow, deliberate. A single letter carved into the surface. E. It didn't belong. Back at his office, he pulled out the original trip manifest. 10 students listed, all accounted for, but something pulled at him. A memory he hadn't thought about in years. The yearbook. It took him 20 minutes to find the right box in the precinct archive room. Dust thick as velvet. Inside, the 1984 edition of Fog Harbor High's senior yearbook. Emery flipped to the class photo page. 10 familiar names, 10 faces smiling under fading ink. Then, on the next page, tucked in the corner, a single name with no photo. Eddie Caldwell. Transferred in spring semester, no clubs, no awards, no listed family, no senior quote, just a name. He wasn't on the permission slips. He wasn't mentioned in any of the parents' statements, but here he was, on the official trip roster handwritten by a secretary who had since passed away. Emery dug deeper. Caldwell had stayed with an uncle on Creighton Street. The uncle's name was Raymond Caldwell, though no one remembered him attending parent-teacher night or answering the phone. The records showed he sold the house 2 days after the disappearance and left no forwarding address. The bank account tied to him closed the same week. Vanished. Just like the bus. Just like the kids. Emery sat back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. 11. There hadn't been 10 kids on that bus. There had been 11. Only 10 of them were ever listed on the plaque. Only 10 were remembered in the papers. Only 10 had parents who stood in the school gym screaming for answers. But the 11th? He'd arrived quietly. And when the bus vanished, so did he. Which meant one of two things. Eddie Caldwell was just another forgotten victim. Or he was the reason no one came back. That night, as the fog crept in from the cliffs, Emery returned to the coast road. Mile marker 17 was still there, rusted, leaning at a strange angle. The same marker the fisherman in 1984 had pointed to when he said he saw the bus vanish into the mist. Emery stepped to the edge of the cliff and stared down into the dark. It didn't make sense. The bus hadn't gone off the road. It had turned, veered inland. Somewhere between the road and the barn, someone had rerouted the bus, hid it, buried it, left breadcrumbs. And now, after 40 years, those breadcrumbs were rising like bones. Back in Barrow Hollow, a light flickered in a second-story window of a forgotten farmhouse. Inside, a man sat in the glow of a small TV. The news report played again, showing the exposed roof of bus number 78 being lifted from the dirt. The man smiled. He opened a drawer and removed a cassette tape labeled Phase 1. Caldwell. He slid it into a player and pressed play. On the tape, a voice crackled through the static. Young, calm, deceptively casual. Testing, testing. This is Eddie Caldwell, Fog Harbor High, Week 1. Subject 7 is suspicious. Subject 3's cracking early. They still think I'm just another student. That's good. That's what we wanted. The tape hissed. The man leaned back, still smiling. Let's see what happens when they remember. The barn sat like a carcass on the edge of Barrow Hollow, its roof sagging, its frame rotted to splinters. Wind pushed the tall grass flat around it. The smell of damp soil and rust lingered in the air as Detective Emery Thorne stepped beneath the yellow tape, his boots sinking into the churned ground where the backhoe had unearthed the roof panel. The roof was real. Faded yellow paint, twisted steel edges, the remains of an emergency hatch torn from its hinges, and stamped across the metal in black, just barely legible. District 23, bus number 78. Emery crouched beside it, resting one gloved hand on the surface. It had been buried deep, deliberately, layered under soil, stone, and a concrete pour so aged and cracked it must have been poured during the Reagan administration. But the intention was unmistakable. This wasn't nature. This was concealment. Nearby, crime scene techs were cataloging every scrap of debris. Plastic bins lined with weatherproof liners, mold-eaten wood fragments, a piece of canvas. But the most important thing had already been logged. The varsity jacket, recovered 2 feet beneath the roof slab, wrapped in an old garbage bag, sealed with duct tape. The stitching on the inside collar read, Brandon Vale, one of the 10. For the first time since the memorial wall had been bolted into the gym, they had something real. Emery felt it in his ribs like a second heartbeat. The kids had been here. This wasn't some urban legend or wind-whipped hallucination. Brandon had been buried beneath this barn, miles from the cliffs, nowhere near where the search teams had combed for weeks in 1984. Emery stood and nodded to the forensics lead, Rachel Yen, who approached with her clipboard under one arm and a dust mask over her face. "We found a sealed hatch in the foundation," she said. "Steel, industrial grade, about 6 feet wide. Could have been for a septic system or storm shelter, but there's no plumbing. And here's the kicker, it was welded shut. Someone torched it closed. Can you get it open?" We called in the fire team. They're bringing a thermal saw. The hatch lay flat behind the barn, half concealed by collapsed beams and mildew-blackened boards. Emery stepped closer. A chain had been looped through the latch and fused by heat, as if someone had wanted to make sure no one ever got back in. The fire crew arrived with their truck just after noon. Sparks flew as they cut into the rusted metal. The sound was deafening, metallic shrieking echoing across the empty field. After nearly 40 minutes, the hinges gave. The lid was pried upward with a groan, revealing a steep stairwell descending into darkness. Emery clicked on his flashlight. He stepped down. The air changed the moment he crossed the threshold. Cooler, damp, and stale. The beam of light swept across concrete walls. Old pipes, mold-veined insulation. At the base of the stairs, the tunnel opened into a square chamber, barely the size of a school office. Plastic crates lined the back wall, stacked 4 high. Some were marked with masking tape. Most had no label at all. He peeled open the first one. The plastic seal cracked like brittle bone. Inside was a school yearbook, wrapped in wax paper. Beneath it, a Polaroid camera. And below that, photographs. He removed one carefully. 10 teenagers stood in a line inside a bare room. Their faces were pale, dirty. Eyes dulled like they hadn't slept in days. Jessica Mayhew stood at the center, her arm linked with Sam Delaney. Carla Bridge had her hands clasped in front of her chest. Manny Ortiz looked away from the camera, lips pursed, jaw clenched, but it was the figure on the far right that made Emery freeze. Someone else, taller, standing slightly apart from the group, just at the edge of the frame. His face was turned, caught mid-blink. He was wearing a denim jacket with no school emblem, no smile, just stillness. Emery had seen that stance before. Back at the station, Mila Gordon confirmed it. She'd been combing through county records and pulled the zoning photo from 1992, the barn intact, the same man standing in the background near the fencing. Same posture, same jacket. No match on facial recognition, she said. No driver's license, no death certificate, no arrest. This guy doesn't exist. He does now, Emery said, setting the photo down on the table. And I think he was the one who put the roof here. Inside another bin, they found a small, leather-bound notebook. Cracked at the spine. Smelled of mildew and ink. The first page was written in careful, methodical script. Observation notes. Phase 1. Subjects 1 to 10. The dates ranged from May 12th to June 3rd, 1984. A 3-week span. Each entry was structured the same, emotionless, clinical, cold. Day 1. Subjects arrived disoriented but unharmed. No signs of aggression. Subject 7 asked about her parents. Redirected her toward cooperative behavior. Day 5. Subjects show early signs of submission. Sleep cycles shortened. No vocalized resistance. Reinforcement through music therapy initiated. Day 9. Subject 3 attempted escape. Sedated. Subject X performed containment procedure. Emery read the lines again. Subject X. There was no Subject X listed on the yearbook. No Subject X in the student roster. But in the back of the notebook, scribbled hastily, was a list of names. Jessica Mayhew, Sam Delaney, Carla Bridge, Derek Qualls, Tina O'Malley, Brandon Vale, Holly Nguyen, Manny Ortiz, Rachel Penn, Eddie Caldwell. Emery blinked. The 10th name, Caldwell, was underlined twice. Next to it, in parentheses, initiated. Below that, scratched into the corner of the page in a different hand, almost violently, he was never one of us. In a third crate, they found a cassette tape labeled Phase 1. Caldwell. When played through the field recorder, the voice that crackled from the speakers was low, male, and young. "This is Eddie Caldwell, Fog Harbor High School, Week 1. Subjects are accepting me. They've started to open up. Jessica thinks I'm just shy. Tina watches everything. She's too quiet. Might need adjusting. Subject 10 still suspects something. Subject 3 is spiraling." He paused. "I've been authorized to escalate." The tape ended. Emery sat back against the wall of the hatch chamber, the air around him suddenly colder. The Polaroids, the notes, the voice. This hadn't been a kidnapping. It had been a test. The barn had been the burial site of evidence, but it had also been a lab. And Eddie Caldwell hadn't been a victim. He'd been an operator. The list confirmed it. Back upstairs, dusk had fallen, and fog was crawling back in from the trees. The firemen were packing their gear. The techs were sealing the bins. But Emery stayed at the hatch's edge, staring down into the darkness that had held the truth for 40 years. There had been 10 missing kids, but there were 11 in that room. One of them had never been missing. One of them had never been a student. And now he was out there somewhere, watching, still running the experiment, still calling it Phase 1. The yearbook sat open on the desk like a wound. Emery stared at the page again, at the blank rectangle where a face should have been. Eddie Caldwell, transfer student. Spring 1984. No quote. No clubs, no photo. Just a name dropped into the graduating class like a ghost. Fog Harbor High had forgotten him long before the disappearance. The other 10 students had families who screamed, cried, held vigils. Caldwell didn't. His so-called uncle had packed up and left 2 days after the bus vanished. House sold in cash. No forwarding address. The phone number disconnected before the police even knocked on his door. Emery hadn't thought about the boy in decades. Now he was back, not as a mystery, but as a name etched into a list that had no right to exist. He flipped open the field notebook recovered from the hatch beneath the barn. The paper was soft, yellowing at the corners. The writing, neat and clipped, didn't read like journal entries. It read like inventory. Subject 1, female, academic leadership, compliant. Subject 2, male, athlete, protective, likely to form attachment with Subject 1. Subject 7, female, quiet, high observer tendency. Resistance possible. And at the end, Subject X, placeholder. Replaces failed subject. Memory conditioning in progress. No anomalies detected by group. Subject X. The list at the back of the notebook matched the 10 missing students, until the 11th line. It didn't name Caldwell explicitly. It simply marked the final line with an X. That same X appeared beside his name in the list found in the Polaroid crate. 10 names, 10 familiar, and then Eddie, underlined, and across from him, a single hand-scrawled word, initiated. Emery closed the book and stared at the wall. Eddie Caldwell had never been a student. He was the reason the bus vanished. Mila stepped into the office, holding a USB stick. "You need to see this." She plugged it into the desktop. A digitized version of the tape labeled Phase 1. Caldwell appeared on the screen. They'd cleaned up the audio, removed the static. The voice came through sharper this time. Calm, detached, like someone reading weather data. "This is Eddie Caldwell, log entry 7. Subject 3 has begun pacing. Subject 6 continues to exhibit short-term memory disruption, likely due to lack of REM sleep. Subject 10 remains on alert. She's asking questions. I've been advised to continue integration through mimicry. Jessica and Sam trust me. I believe I can influence the social hierarchy by day 10. Then a pause. The voice lowered. If Subject 7 continues to observe me too closely, I may need to initiate redirection protocol. I recommend sedation. Mila muted the playback. He didn't sound like a kid, she said. He wasn't, Emery replied. He was planted. By who? I don't know, but he was reporting to someone. Mila took a breath. I ran the school logs again. All 10 permission slips are signed by parents, except one. Tina O'Malley, Emery said. She was the outlier. Exactly. Her slip's blank. No signature, no initials. The ink on her name is different too, added in a heavier stroke, like someone wrote her in after the others. Emery stood. You think Tina wasn't supposed to be on the bus? I think someone replaced her name, or forged it. Maybe she swapped spots with someone last minute. Emery walked to the window and looked out across the harbor. Fog was crawling over the water again, dragging long, translucent tendrils through the masts and rooftops. It looked alive. He remembered Tina, small, quick-eyed, the only one who didn't speak much but always saw everything. She used to sit in the back corner of class and sketch people's faces when they weren't looking. She had seen Caldwell. She had known something wasn't right. And now she was gone. Scrubbed from records, like someone had deliberately erased the trail leading back to her. The photo from the Polaroid crate still sat on the table. 10 teens standing in a circle, dazed and dirt-smudged, inside what looked like a concrete room with no windows. One light bulb dangled from the ceiling. Each face had a number drawn in pen on the bottom corner. Subject 1, Jessica. Subject 2, Sam. Subject 3, Carla. Subject 4, Brandon. Subject 5, Manny. Subject 6, Derek. Subject 7, Tina. Subject 8, Holly. Subject 9, Rachel. Subject 10. Subject 10's face had been scratched out, and behind them, almost obscured by shadow, stood the 11th figure. Caldwell, still, watching. Later that evening, Emery drove to the old school building, now shuttered and covered in ivy. The hallways were filled with silence and the smell of dust and linoleum. He made his way to the basement, where the original trip records were stored. Cardboard boxes, crumbling file folders. The air was cold and damp, heavy with the weight of lost years. He found the 1984 drawer, pulled the file labeled College Fair, May 11th. Inside were 10 permission slips. All names matched the yearbook, all signed, but behind the stack, folded and stained with time, was a photocopy of a class schedule. One extra name had been penciled in under room 206, Caldwell E. It wasn't typed, it wasn't signed, it wasn't dated. Someone had added it by hand. Outside, the sky had darkened. The fog pressed against the basement windows like breath. Emery stared at the penciled name, heart hammering. Someone had inserted Caldwell into the school roster. Someone had covered for him, and if someone had planted him, they were still out there. He drove back to the station just before midnight. Mila was still there, hunched over her monitor. She didn't look up when he walked in. I found something, she said. She tapped a key and brought up a digitized scan of a government form. Top secret, redacted. The header read, Project Covaxis, Phase I Trial, Closed Circuit Observation, Educational Unit, Fog Harbor Branch. What is this? Freedom of Information Act request, filed 6 years ago. Someone else tried to get these documents opened. They were denied. Everything else is blacked out, but look at the footer. The page ended with a single line. All data to be returned to Division Lead via Caldwell Conduit. Emery sat down slowly. It was real. A program, a trial, a target group of students, and a plant sent to dismantle them from within. The fog had covered more than a disappearance. It had covered an experiment. The names on the plaque in the gym weren't just victims. They had been test subjects. The knock on the door came just after dawn. Soft, but deliberate. 3 raps, spaced evenly. Thomas Penn had been expecting it for years. He lived alone in a second-floor apartment in Camden, 3 towns east of Fog Harbor. paint peeled from the shutters. The number on the door was missing a nail. The air smelled like varnish and rain. Emery stood on the threshold, holding a folder under his arm and a photograph in his hand. Mila stood behind him, scanning the porch with quiet focus. Thomas opened the door halfway. His eyes were pale and sleepless, his jaw clenched like he hadn't spoken in days. Behind him, canvases leaned against every wall, twisted figures in unnatural poses, yellow buses with no faces behind the windows, thick fog rolling over black stairwells. "You're here about the bus," he said. Not a question. Emery nodded. Thomas opened the door all the way. Inside, the apartment smelled like turpentine and old wood. The kitchen sink was full of brushes. An easel sat beneath the only window, a fresh canvas, still wet. 10 students holding hands in a circle. In the center, a black figure with no eyes. Thomas gestured to the painting. "She told me what it looked like." "Your sister?" Emery asked. "Rachel. She never came back, but I heard her. For years. In the walls, in the floorboards, in my sleep. She used to whisper to me when I was a kid. I thought it was dreams, but it wasn't." Mila took out a small recorder. "You mind if we—" Thomas waved his hand. "Doesn't matter anymore." Emery pulled the Polaroid from the folder, the one recovered from the hatch. He laid it on the table. Thomas stared. "That's them," he said. "That's all of them. Do you recognize the man in the back?" Thomas nodded slowly. "He wasn't supposed to be there, Rachel told me. He was already on the bus when they got on, sitting in the very back. No one remembered seeing him get picked up." He tapped the photo with one paint-streaked finger. "She said he watched them sleep." Emery looked at Mela. She gave a slight nod. "Rachel told you this in dreams?" Emery asked. "No," Thomas replied. "She told me when I was 11, the night before my birthday. She came into my room. I was awake. I know I was awake. She stood by the window and whispered into my ear. She said, 'They let him in, but he never left.'" "Did she say a name?" Thomas hesitated. "Only once. Caldwell, back at the station, Emery pulled every mention of the Caldwell family from town records. There was no real birth certificate, no dental records, no school photos, just a single line in a 1984 school directory, and a change of address notice filed a week after the disappearance. The house Caldwell supposedly lived in had burned down in the 1990s. The fire report said it was electrical. No injuries. The owner of record at the time had no known relatives. When they died, no one came to claim the ashes. Emery sat back and stared at the corkboard. The photographs, the notebook pages, the scratched-out yearbook entries. Caldwell was a ghost, but he left fingerprints. Hints. Just enough to keep the trail warm without revealing the whole. The tape confirmed it. His voice. Flat. Detached. Subject 3 has stopped eating. Subject 6 has begun humming during sleep. Subject 10 requested paper and pencil. Permission denied. Caldwell was documenting the collapse of children like someone monitoring lab rats. Mila walked in holding a printout. "You're gonna want to see this." It was a scanned application form, dated 1984, filed under the name Edward Caldwell. But the handwriting didn't match any of the other school files. The form had been filled out in capital letters, clinical, and the emergency contact field was blank. On the back, someone had written a note in faded red pen. "Monitor carefully. If social integration fails by week 3, initiate withdrawal protocol and prepare for reclamation. No contact with subjects post-departure. Beneath it, return to division lead. Barrow Hollow, Site 7. Site 7. They hadn't just buried a roof. They'd buried a facility. Emery returned to the barn alone that night. The fog was heavy, pouring through the trees like water, settling against the earth. He parked beside the chain-link fence and stepped over the caution tape. His boots crunched over broken glass, dirt, and something that felt like bone. He moved quickly, flashlight sweeping across the concrete foundation where the hatch had been. The door was still open. He descended the stairs slowly. The cold was immediate and unkind. His breath turned to mist. The flashlight flickered. At the bottom, the crates were gone, packed and moved to state evidence, but the shape of the space remained. The chamber, the layout. A thin groove in the floor where a cot had been bolted. A black ring in the ceiling where a wire had dangled. He paced the room. Then he saw it. Near the far wall, where the light didn't quite reach, a faint mark, scratched into the concrete. He stepped closer. It was a drawing, rough, childlike. 10 stick figures in a line, and beneath them, the words, "We weren't all students." Emery stared at the writing for a long time. His flashlight hummed. The shadows felt thicker than before, and for the first time since the roof was pulled from the earth, he realized something they hadn't considered. If Caldwell had been planted, what if he wasn't the only one? What if the experiment hadn't ended? Fog Harbor had a smell that never left your clothes, brine and mildew, salt and cedar. It drifted through the town like a second skin, clinging to brick, to hair, to memory. Detective Emery Thorne stood beneath the old lifeguard tower on the abandoned North Beach, hands deep in his coat pockets, watching the waves fold over themselves in gray, breathless rhythm. The ocean had been ruled out in 1984. No skid marks, no guardrail damage. Nothing ever washed up that belonged to the kids, except for Rachel Penn's torn shoe, and even that could have come from anywhere. But now Emery wondered, what if that had been planted too? A sound behind him made him turn. It was Mila. She moved lightly, a scarf wrapped tight against her throat, clipboard under her arm. "We got the last of the files from Augusta," she said. "Black ink, half of it redacted, but there's something else." She handed him a folder. Inside were several pages from a previously sealed criminal investigation opened in 1987, 3 years after the bus vanished. It was an internal inquiry, never made public, about a psychiatric facility called Del Crest Unit 7, operated under the state's Youth Rehabilitation Program. The lead psychiatrist, Dr. Malcolm Eldrin, had been placed on administrative leave after 2 patients escaped. Only one was ever found. Patient files included only initials. Subject C, age unknown. Subject X, age unknown. Both were described as exceptional in emotional mimicry and capable of maintaining false social integration over extended periods. Mila flipped to the last page. "There's a transfer form signed in May of 1984. From Del Crest to Fog Harbor. Emergency education placement. It matches the same week Eddie Caldwell showed up at the school." She looked at Emery. What if Caldwell wasn't alone on that bus? Emery didn't answer. Not right away. Instead, he opened the notebook again, the one found beneath the barn. He flipped past the observational notes, past the photo log, to the final page. It was nearly blank, except for a line scrawled in a more frantic hand. "X knows what you're thinking. X is thinking it too." He read it again. "X was never one of them," he whispered. Back at the precinct, they pulled every interview transcript from 1984. Teachers, parents, witnesses. Most were vague recollections, fog, confusion, heartbreak. But one statement stood out. A janitor named Clive Derry, who had cleaned the school cafeteria on the morning of the trip. He'd said, "There was a new kid. Sat in the back, quiet, sure, but polite. Told me he liked the smell of bleach. Said it reminded him of home." Emery circled the quote. "That's not something a normal kid says?" Mila leaned over. What if Subject X was never Caldwell? What if Caldwell was monitoring X? That thought stuck. The notebook's entries were clinical, but the tone shifted when describing one subject. Never numbered, never named. Always referred to as X. X engages with others but remains emotionally separate. X does not sleep. X observes me, observing. X asks questions it shouldn't be able to form. I am being studied too. Emery dropped the notebook on the desk. He wasn't in charge. He was in containment. Mila frowned. So who put him on the bus? Whoever ran the Delcrest facility, whoever signed off on Project Covaxis. Mila opened her laptop. I've been running searches on any surviving Delcrest employees. There's barely a trace. The program was shut down in '89 after a class action lawsuit, sealed. But I found this. She turned the screen toward him. A photo from 1983. A staff group shot. Doctors and nurses in front of a chain-link fence. Second row, far left. A young man with a buzz cut, wearing a white coat. Lanyard tag flipped backward. Mila zoomed in. It was Caldwell. Emery's breath left his lungs in a slow, tight exhale. He wasn't a student. He wasn't even a subject. He was staff, a planted observer, embedded to manage an experiment. Emery sat back in his chair. Then where is Subject X? It was after midnight when the call came. A farmer outside Fog Harbor reported lights in the woods. Strange patterns in the mist. A shed door broken open. Inside, claw marks on the walls. And an old cassette player, still warm. When Emery and Mila arrived, they found a single tape resting on a wooden stool, labeled in ink so faint it looked like breath. Phase 2. Emery pressed play. The voice was a child's, genderless, cold. They thought I was part of the test, but I was watching them. I watched Eddie forget who he was. I watched them stop looking for the door. I waited. They pause. Static. But it's open now. Mila stared at the player. Is that recent? Emery nodded. That tape wasn't here 40 years ago. They turned toward the open forest. Fog moved unnaturally through the trees, pushing, not drifting, like something had stirred. The tape hissed again. A whisper, barely audible. I never left the room. The old bus garage still stood at the edge of the Fog Harbor School District, long since decommissioned. Its walls were rusted, its chain-link fence curled inward like a rotting jaw. A single security light blinked above the door, flickering, unsteady, barely holding back the dark. Emery stood just inside the entrance, flashlights sweeping across old maintenance logs and discarded air filters. The space reeked of dust and diesel. The place hadn't been touched in years, but the records had. Someone had pulled the logs recently. 3 binders were missing, 1 drawer was unlocked, and a single bus seat lay in the center of the floor, like it had been yanked from a vehicle and dropped there on purpose. A number had been spray-painted onto the cracked vinyl. 11. Mila stepped in behind him. There were only 10 kids, right? That's what the school claimed, Emery said. 10 permission slips, 10 photos, 10 names carved on the wall. She crouched beside the seat, ran a hand over the fabric. Then why keep this? Emery didn't answer. His mind had already gone back to the notebook, the one they'd found beneath the barn. 11 names, 10 with descriptions, 1 with only an X. He walked deeper into the garage. The beams creaked above him. His flashlight scanned the walls until it landed on something scrawled behind the old tool cabinets. Black marker, jagged handwriting. He was already there. Mila saw it too. She stepped back instinctively. Jesus. They both stood in silence for a beat. Emery took out his phone and snapped a photo. Then he turned to the locker room. It was a narrow corridor lined with rusting steel doors. Most were empty. Cobwebs, broken locks, rotting boots. But one had been pried open recently. Inside was a stack of yellowed index cards bound with twine, sitting atop a student's backpack. Mila flipped the top card over. In neat, all-caps handwriting. Control, Phase 1. Objectives, trust, isolation, observation. Then, failure, Subject 3 removed, Subject 10 deteriorated, Subject X unstable, facility abandoned. Records sealed. Beneath the stack was a Polaroid, unlabeled. It showed the inside of the bus. 9 students visible, a 10th hunched low behind the last seat, but the window reflection captured 11 faces. Emery leaned in. "That's not a mirror." "No," Mila said. "It's a glass panel, taken from the front seat, facing back." He pointed to the reflection. "See that?" The 11th face wasn't seated. It was standing. Too tall, too still. Eyes open but wrong. Flat, like the expression wasn't real, just mimicked. Mila whispered, "It's the same face from the barn photo. The one watching from the shadows. The one no one ever remembered seeing board the bus. The one who didn't belong." Emery took out his notebook and drew a diagram. 10 seats, 5 rows, 2 per row. "Let's map them." They assigned each name to a position, based on recovered journals, statements from teachers, and the seating chart Jessica's mother had drawn years ago for investigators. But one seat, row 3, passenger left, was unclaimed. "I always thought subject X was Caldwell," Emery said. "But what if X wasn't seated? What if X didn't need a seat?" Mila tilted her head. "You mean, like a chaperone?" "No," he said quietly. "Like a shadow." They returned to the station and dug up the original radio dispatch logs from the morning of the disappearance. The last known check-in from Bus 78's driver, Mike Ferris, had occurred at 6:44 a.m. Static. Then his voice. "Coming through the bay curve, visibility dropping, still got all 10, Caldwell's quiet this morning, almost eerie." Then silence. At 6:47 a.m., dispatch attempted contact. No response. The search team scoured the cliffs. The coastline. Nothing. But in the driver's logbook recovered decades earlier, now overlooked for years, Mila found something buried on the back cover, penciled faintly under a doodle of a gear shift. "Never saw the last one get on." The last one. Not one of the 10. Something else. Emery felt the hair on his arms rise. He wasn't lying. He saw someone that morning, someone already there. So Subject X boarded before the others? Or, Emery said, never left the bus. It was almost 3 a.m. when they returned to the photo board. All 10 students. The class pictures. The smiling faces. All lined up in chronological order, except one. A blurry yearbook image of a science fair from the year before the trip. The photo was grainy, barely in focus, but in the corner, crouched behind the fog machine, was a figure staring into the lens. It was the same face, same blank expression, same straight hair, same hollow eyes. Caldwell hadn't been the first. He'd been the second. Emery turned to Mila. "We need to find the bus." "The real bus?" He nodded. "The one with the other seats." Mila hesitated. "You think it's still out there?" "I think we only found the roof," he said. "Someone hid the rest. And if they found it, maybe they'd finally learn what really climbed aboard Bus 78 that morning in 1984, what stayed silent the whole ride, and what waited for the others to fall asleep before beginning. The junkyard at the edge of Pike's Crossing wasn't on any modern map. It didn't need to be. The road to it was little more than gravel and memory, and the gate hadn't been locked in over a decade. Emery and Mila arrived just after sunrise, the light creeping up over rusted-out sedans and crumpled metal like it was a shame to touch anything. Rows of dismembered machinery sat in silent judgment. Axle bones, dented doors, stripped hoods. And deeper in, beyond the stacked shipping containers and half-sunken buses, was what they came for. A mound of earth and scrap had partially collapsed during a recent storm, exposing the long frame of a buried vehicle. The soil around it was damp and loose, but one corner of yellow paint shone through. District 23. Bus number 78. Not the roof, not a section. The entire bus. Mila crouched beside the rear axle. We found the shell. Someone buried it whole. Emery stepped back, taking in the length of it. The windows were gone. Tires flattened decades ago. but the metal remained, twisted but intact. The door was wedged shut under layers of dirt and debris. They brought in a recovery team from the state forensics unit, who worked for 6 hours to excavate the bus without disturbing potential evidence. By late afternoon, the door groaned open under hydraulic pressure. Dust and mildew poured out. The interior was dark, the vinyl seats torn and blackened with mold. Rain had leaked through long before it was buried, warping the floorboards and rusting the seat mounts. But the rows were still visible. 10 pairs, and at the very back, right passenger side, an 11th seat. Not factory installed, bolted in after. A different make. Thinner, unpadded, fixed directly to the steel ribbing beneath the bus frame. A seat for someone who wasn't meant to belong. Mila climbed aboard slowly, stepping between exposed beams and broken glass. She knelt beside the 11th seat and pulled something from beneath it, an old, crumpled notebook. Water damaged. The ink had bled in places, but enough remained. She held it up. It's a journal. They opened it under sealed light back at the station. Page 1. May 12th. The bus is too quiet. Sam talks too much. Tina sees too much. Caldwell doesn't sleep. He watches even when he pretends not to. May 14th. Carla said the fog isn't natural. I believe her. It comes in before dawn. Heavy, like it's waiting. May 15th. There's something behind the wall of the bus. I heard it breathing. Every page was written in the same hand. A student's, uneven, nervous. Most of the entries read like confessions or instructions. We have to stay awake. We have to count heads every hour. There were 10 of us, but now there are 11 shoes in the aisle. One entry made Emery stop cold. May 17th. I asked him what he wanted. The one who doesn't talk. He said, to finish. Then he sat in the new seat. We didn't put it there. That night, they reviewed the physical evidence recovered from the bus floor. Buttons, pieces of tape, a rusted keychain, and wedged into the crevice beneath the driver's chair, a micro-cassette. Emery and Mila listened to it together. The audio was faint, wind, breathing, someone speaking low and fast. Caldwell's gone. He walked off during lights out. We thought he was sick. Tina says he was afraid. I've never seen him afraid before. A pause, then, the fog moved against the door last night. Not over it, against it, like hands. They played it twice, 3 times, each time catching something new. A cough, a whisper. The new one isn't sleeping. Neither are we. Mila sat back. The kids knew. They knew there was an 11th, and they were trapped with him. Emery rubbed his eyes. And we've been asking the wrong question for 40 years. She looked at him. It's not what happened to the 10 kids on the bus, he said. It's who or what was the 11th. The photos, the cassette, the seat. It all pointed to the same horror. The missing students weren't just taken. They were studied, and someone, or something, had been placed among them. Not as a participant, but as a test. And that test had never been called off. That evening, they received a call from the main historical archives. A librarian had been reviewing old interviews for a podcast episode on cold cases. She found a misfiled VHS tape from 1993. An anonymous tip sent to a local news station. The footage was grainy, time-stamped 1992. A handheld camcorder, focused on the woods near Barrow Hollow, fog everywhere, and a figure walking through it. Tall, narrow, head tilted slightly, like it was listening. The camera zoomed in. For a moment, the fog parted. And there he was. Not Eddie Caldwell, not one of the 10, but someone else. The same face, the same eyes, standing in the woods, staring straight into the camera, and then he smiled. The fog had come in thick again, thicker than anyone remembered. It crawled through Fog Harbor like a living thing, clinging to rooftops, seeping under door frames, pressing itself against windows as if it were waiting for something. Emery Thorne sat at the end of the evidence table. The VHS tape paused on the television screen. The still frame burned in static. That face in the woods, half shrouded, half smiling. He didn't blink. Neither did the figure. Mila sat beside him, silent, reading the latest forensics report. The bus had been buried with intention. Soil tested from beneath the frame showed chemical traces of formaldehyde, chalk dust, and a sedative used in the 1980s for dissociative conditioning. The seats in the middle rows had faint impressions of restraints once screwed into the base. The kids were drugged, Mila said quietly. They were restrained. They were studied like lab animals. Emery nodded. And someone was watching it all. Mila set the report down. You think it was the same figure from the tape, from the woods? I think he never left, Emery said. Not the bus, not the town. The new witness came forward just before midnight. Her name was Joyce Alcott, 84 years old, retired school nurse. She had worked at Fog Harbor High in the 1980s. No one had asked her much back then. She hadn't insisted. But now, after seeing the image in the news teaser, the one the local station had blurred and teased as new photographic evidence, she called the station. I remember him, she said. The boy with the still face. She sat in the station interview room, trembling hands wrapped around a styrofoam cup of tea. He didn't move like the others, she whispered. He sat straight-backed, quiet, never blinked unless someone else blinked first. But I remember one thing more than anything else. Emery leaned forward. What? Joyce's eyes were glassy. Her voice trembled. He didn't cast a reflection. Silence. Mila glanced at Emery, unsure how to respond. Joyce continued. I didn't think anything of it at first. The mirror in the nurse's office was cracked. I thought maybe it was an angle thing. But then I watched carefully, and he stood there, right in front of it. I could see the fourth stand, the cabinet, the window. But not him. She looked at both of them, eyes wet. He knew I saw. That same night, the fog rolled in heavier than ever. Visibility dropped to 10 feet. Traffic halted. Streetlights blinked and dimmed. And in the middle of it, a call came from the town cemetery. Vandalism. Grave markers overturned. One of them stripped completely clean. No name, no dates. Just an empty stone, polished smooth. The caretaker reported something strange. Footsteps. Bare, slow. Across the gravel paths. No sound, no figure, just the prints. Size 9, narrow heel, childlike, but placed far apart, as if the walker's gait was unnatural. Mila reviewed every report of missing or runaway teens in the region over the past 30 years. One pattern stood out. Once every 5 years, in towns neighboring Fog Harbor, a group of 3 or 4 students would vanish on the way to school. No trace, no evidence, no bodies. Always on mist-heavy mornings, always in a bus or van, always logged as driver error or mechanical failure, but never found. It's happening again, she said. Not again, Emery murmured. Still, that same afternoon, Mila returned to the roof of the bus. It had been sealed in evidence, but she requested access, searching for markings. Her hand brushed the interior panel, the metal beneath where the emergency hatch had once been. There, in the dust, barely visible, a drawing, a child's sketch. 10 stick figures in a line, the last one upside down. Above them, a bus, and beneath it, a mouth. The bus hadn't just driven into fog, it had been consumed. They returned to the hatch site at the barn. The underground chamber had been stripped, but the walls still held traces, faint outlines of numbers, tally marks carved with fingernails, and beneath the light switch, a sentence etched so deep into the concrete it had to be burned in with heat. He knew the way out. Mila whispered, "Who?" Emery turned to her. Caldwell. He'd always known the others were never supposed to make it out. He hadn't run because he was afraid. He'd run because X had broken the rules. And if the game was broken, It was still being played. The final line of the notebook came back to him. X knows what you're thinking. X is thinking it too. Mila checked the final page of the recovered journal from the buried bus. The very last line, written in red ink, was short, not shaky like the rest, not terrified. We fed him. We didn't know. We gave him names. The power flickered. Emery looked up. The overhead light buzzed, dimmed, then came back. The station's emergency generator hummed to life for no apparent reason. Outside, fog pressed against the windows like breath. The tape recorder clicked, and a voice whispered, "I remember you." The town of Fog Harbor shut down at 9:03 p.m., not by order, not by force. It was the fog, heavy, unnatural, alive, rolling in like it had purpose, cloaking streets, swallowing headlights, and blotting out the stars. Phones stopped ringing. Radios hissed. The air buzzed like it had teeth. At the precinct, Emery and Mila watched the emergency feed flicker on the wall-mounted screen. One by one, the live cameras around town went dark. First Main Street, then the ferry dock, then the road to Pike's Crossing. Total blackout. "Is this a power grid issue?" Mila asked, trying to sound logical. "No," Emery said, staring out the window. "It's the fog. It's him." They didn't say the name. They hadn't spoken it aloud since reviewing the footage again, frame by frame. The figure in the VHS tape wasn't just watching. He was mirroring. Every tilt of the camcorder, every breath of the person behind it, he matched it. Moved when they moved, paused when they paused, as if he were inside the lens. Inside them. At 9:14 p.m., the front door of the precinct creaked open. Nobody touched it. Emery and Mila drew their weapons, moved slowly into the lobby. No one was there. Just wet footprints, bare, narrow, and small, leading across the floor, disappearing beneath the evidence room door. They didn't follow. Not yet. Instead, they returned to the board. The 11 names, the seating chart, the evidence tags, and something clicked. There were never 10 victims, Emery said quietly. Mila turned to him. There were never 11 either, he continued. There was one. She narrowed her eyes. What do you mean? One victim, the bus itself. He pointed to the sketches, the journal entries, the burned-in sentence. He knew the way out. Caldwell wasn't observing them. He was trying to contain something, and when he failed, they sealed the whole thing. The bus, the chamber, the program, buried it all, hoping it would stay quiet. And now it's not, Mila said. At 9:33 p.m., the backup generator failed. Lights out. Emergency flood lamps kicked in, and in that red glow, the glass over the evidence board cracked, splintered outward like something had pushed from behind. Emery backed away. Mila stared at the glass. We have to say it. No. It knows we know. Mila? She turned to him, voice sharp. Emery, we have to name it. If we don't, it's going to keep crawling through our lives, through our heads. The cracked mirror in the corner pulsed faintly with movement, as if something inside the glass was breathing. Finally, Emery whispered, X, and the building went silent. No hum, no outside wind, not even their own breath. Then a single voice, childlike, flat, came from the speaker of the old tape deck in the evidence locker. You know me now. And then the lights surged back. The fog retreated, but the damage was done. The evidence board had changed. Where before there had been names and photos of 10 students, now there were only 9. Tina O'Malley was missing, her picture torn from its tack, her name scratched off the list. In its place, a Polaroid Emery had never seen before, still wet, still developing. It showed the inside of the precinct. Emery, Mila, standing exactly as they were now, but behind them, just behind the glass, the boy, smiling, and holding Tina O'Malley's photo in his hand. By morning, the fog was gone. Not lifted, gone. It didn't thin or fade or pull back. It vanished, all at once, as if it had been dismissed. But something had changed in Fog Harbor. Something in the light, in the quiet, in the way dogs refused to walk near the bus depot and radios crackled when tuned to dead stations. Tina O'Malley's photo was never recovered. Her name no longer appeared in old yearbooks. Even on the digital scans Mila had saved to her cloud drive. In interviews, her mother, once the most vocal advocate in town, suddenly didn't remember having a daughter. Mila tried to show her the preserved evidence report, but the woman just shook her head. "That's not my handwriting." Emery stopped trying to explain. He knew now. Names could be taken, erased, not just from memory, but from records, photographs, grief. If the thing on the bus could choose, it could also remove. And maybe that had been the point all along. Not to kill, but to edit. They returned to the barn one last time. The underground chamber had been filled in with concrete. State order, fast-tracked within hours of the latest discovery. No trace remained. But Mila had saved copies of everything. Notes, audio, even thermal scans of the space. And she'd found something new in the digitals. A faint shape embedded in the rear wall. Not a door, not a tunnel. A window, rectangular, long sealed. Plaster poured over it in thick layers. But from the scan, you could just make out what lay beyond. Rows, seats, a chamber behind the chamber, a second room. "Another bus," Mila whispered. "Or something worse." But it didn't matter. It was gone now, buried beneath tons of rebar and federal silence. And yet, the morning after the fill, Emery found a package on his doorstep. No postmark, no return address. Inside, a reel-to-reel audio tape. Label, Covaxis/Phase 3-Listen Alone. He set up the old player in the precinct's archive room, closed the blinds, turned the lock. The tape began with static, then a voice, calm, clipped, familiar. "Caldwell, if you've received this tape, then the facility has been breached. Phase 2 is complete. Subject X remains active. Subject X cannot be destroyed. Subject X learns." A long pause, then, "This program began with one goal, obedience. What we discovered was not obedience, but revision. The human mind is not sacred. It is clay, and Subject X has fingers." More static. "You don't win by containing it. You survive by bargaining." Emery leaned in. "You make a pact." That night, Emery burned the tape, but Mila saved a copy. She didn't say why. Some part of her wanted to understand. Not stop it, not fight it, know it. Because knowledge, she reasoned, was protection. Until the day her reflection didn't blink when she did. Mila dreamt of the bus. Not the buried one, not the photos, not even the rusting skeleton beneath the junkyard. This one was whole, clean, quiet, idling in a gray field that had no sky. The door was open, the engine humming softly. 10 seats, 9 names, and the 11th? It looked like her. She woke gasping, drenched in sweat, her phone blinking on the nightstand. A voicemail, no caller ID, timestamp 3:33 a.m. She played it, static, then a whisper, her own voice, except wrong, slower, hollow. "The route never ends, it only loops, all roads lead back." She flung the phone across the room. By dawn, she was at Emery's door. "I think I brought it with me," she said. He let her in without a word. The living room was dark, the windows covered in taped newspaper. On the coffee table sat a row of burnt matchsticks, each lined up evenly in a straight row. "There were 10 last night," Emery said quietly. "Now there are 9. Mila didn't ask what that meant. She already knew. They spent the next 48 hours cataloging every last piece of evidence, before it, too, could vanish. The audio tapes were digitized. The seating chart was copied and hidden in off-site storage. Photos were printed, labeled, and duplicated. They knew the pattern now. Every cycle, it took one. Removed them from memory, from photographs, from family, from time. And every cycle, it grew more precise. Less messy, more surgical. Like it was refining the system. On the final night before the files were scheduled for state transfer, Emery opened the last of the recovered Polaroids from the lab. It wasn't cataloged. No barcode. Just an image of a school hallway, empty. Lockers on both sides. Clock above the door reading 6:44 a.m., the same time the bus had gone silent in 1984. In the center of the frame, facing away from the camera, stood a figure in a school uniform. Their back was impossibly straight, their shadow split in two, and their hand was resting gently on a locker. Number 11. They made a decision. It couldn't be destroyed. It couldn't be outed, not in a way the public would believe. So they'd seal it, not with concrete, but with silence. Files were archived under Unsolved archival hazard. The tapes marked for degraded, unrecoverable. The bus was quietly sold for scrap. But before that, Emery walked aboard one last time. In the very back, the 11th seat was gone, removed, as if it had never been there. Instead, someone had scrawled on the steel floor in chalk, "I'm riding with you now." He stepped off, walked away, and never spoke of it again. Mila left town that spring. Transferred departments, changed numbers, burned her notebooks in a clearing she didn't recognize. But she never stopped checking school bus rosters, never stopped following fog reports, never stopped counting heads in class photos. Because somewhere out there, a child always goes missing when the fog comes in heavy. And no one ever remembers who they were. Just a feeling that someone's seat used to be filled. Someone who smiled a little too long, who blinked a little too late, who knew the route without being told. November 12th, 2024. Location: Barrow Hollow, Maine. A substitute driver fills in on an old school route. The fog is thick, thicker than he's ever seen it. Visibility is low, the wipers weak. 9 kids on board, but every time he checks the mirror, he counts 10. He stops the bus, stands, walks the aisle, 9 faces, all familiar, all accounted for. Then he sees it, in the very back. An empty seat, slightly warm, something carved into the plastic siding. The route never ends. It only loops. He turns around, and the road is gone. Only fog and the hum of the engine.